Hi folks, my name is Adam and I like to make tiny nerdy things. And having recently watched the latest Spider-Man movie, I felt inspired to make a friendly neighborhood web slinger of my own. Now, like any 8-limbed superhero, I'm gonna need to start with a cephalothorax and an abdomen, but Peter Parker ain't no Logan, so instead of an adamantium skeleton, he's gonna have to go with a slightly less dense aluminium skeleton made up of leftover foil from last night's burrito. Once I've covered my little burrito balls in a thin layer of pale fleshy Manspider colored clay, I can attach my cephalothorax to my abdomen using a little rod of armature wire to help secure the connection. I'll then begin to blend the two balls together to build up the space between these two fleshy gonads until I've got a slightly more YouTube appropriate fleshy looking peanut. Finally, before I attach the legs, I'll add a bit of extra clay to the butt area for future plumping, then I can cut some lengths of wire which will get wrapped around the front lump. By wrapping and pinching the wire like this, I can make sure that the legs are solid and they can provide adequate support for the rest of the sculpture. If you just jam them through the body, then they end up being a bit too wobbly and they can spin around while you're trying to add the detail. Unfortunately, once the front wire was attached, I realized that I'd made something incredibly sus, so to avoid getting this video demonetized, I'm just going to skip straight ahead to the part where I've covered the wire in clay and bent Peter's legs into a more supportive position. Once I've double-checked the ad-friendly guidelines, I can start to build up the back ribs by adding little wormy dailies across Peter's back before gently blending them in to create a nightmarish-looking rib cage. This then gets pressed down the center so I can add a bunch of vertebrae and blend them in as well. Some final smoothing will finish off the back so I can get started adding some detail to his chest. Now, much like his back, Peter's ribcage will be poking through the skin here as well. But to keep from bulking up the body too much, instead of adding clay, I'm just going to use my rollers to indent the clay here. I will build up the diaphragm a tiny bit more though, as well as add a slightly larger solar plexus where his ribs join. Some little lumps of clay added between the chest and the butt area will help to add a bit more gnarly detail and hopefully help to sell the look of stretching skin, which I guess is what I'm going for here. I don't know anymore. Now, while I was adding a bit of extra surface texture via blue nitrile gloves, I got to wondering if the Manspider's back end wasn't missing a little something, so I did what anyone in my position would do, and I made him a big pair of meaty butt cheeks. This of course felt pretty on brand for the channel, and you might say I was pleased with my decision. Otherwise, with my superhero butt cheeks in place, I could do some final texturing with my ball styluses to really gnarly up the skin, then it's into the oven to bake while I get to work making Manspider's head. Like the rest of the body, this starts as a little lump of leftover burrito foil that gets wrapped in the same pale fleshy clay before being built up into a more appropriately head-shaped shape. Once I've achieved an adequately sized and shaped head-sized shape, I can stick it onto my freshly baked body, leaving a bit of space for the neck. I'll fill the neck in with some more little lumps of clay, blending in both the neck and the body as I go, before finishing the connection with some more little lumps of stretched skin to really highlight Peter Parker's strong jawline. Finally, with the head attached and firmly secured, I can get to work making his face. Now, I wasn't sure at this point which variation of Peter Parker's Manspider I wanted to work with, but I think we can all agree that a mostly spider-like face on a human skull is the obvious choice. To that end, I've opened up his mouth into a massive gaping hole so that I can fill it later with a pair of mandibles and a bunch of teeth before poking a set of eye holes for his eyes, then another set for more eyes, and then again for even more eyes. Now with the eyes in place, I'll poke a couple larger divots to the sides of his cheeks so I can fit his mandibles. While I was doing that, I was struck with a bolt of inspiration and decided that since this is a Manspider, maybe instead of standard spider mandibles, Peter's mandibles could be fingers. So naturally I made a big pair of fat sausage fingers to fit into the pre-poked mandible holes, as well as a pair of longer noodly fingers to attach to the side of his head. To finish it all off though, he needs that winning Peter Parker smile, so I smooshed some translucent clay onto the ball stylus so I could make a slightly curved strip of top and bottom teeth. Once his teeth are in place and I've added the necessary gum line around the lips, I'll add a pair of totally normal ears to the side of Peter's head and it's into the oven to bake again before drilling some holes to add the rest of his arms. Otherwise, a quick measure and cut will make sure they're all an equal length. And I can bend them into their semi-final position before wrapping them in a layer of thin wire followed by that initial layer of flesh. Once I got the wire covered in a pale fleshy clay, I can start to bulk up the limbs a bit so they're slightly more humanoid looking. The plan here is to have his 4 supporting legs be bog standard human looking legs, albeit bent at a slightly awkward angle, while the front 4 will be a set of totally normal human arms. Except like really long. I also don't want them to be overly muscular, so I'm gonna try and keep the detail to a minimum and limit the amount of clay that I'm adding at this point. Once the proportions are good enough, I can add some more of that wonderful nitrile glove texturing and get to work making my hands. These start out as little lumps of clay that I'll smoosh into a slightly oblong pancake, then cut a set of fingies into the tip. Then some strategic poking and prodding will elongate the fingers, and I can add a thumb as well as build up the padding around the hand and the knuckles on top. Some quick and dirty poking with a flat tool will give me some fingernails, and I can jam the hand onto one of my many arm nubs, then blend it in and reposition the fingers into my final pose, which was meant to be a web-slinging hand, but it looks more like he's throwing up a heavy metal sign, which I'm totally fine with. I'll then repeat this process 3 more times for the other hands until I've got a set of 4 perfectly normal and not the least bit unsettlingly proportioned arms, which then just leaves me with the back legs. I realized at this point that I was starting to lean a bit too heavily into the humanoid aspect of Peter's Manspider, and it was becoming a bit too hard to tell him apart from any old humanoid finger-mandibled character, so instead of a normal 5-toed foot, I went with something slightly more spidery. I mean, I still gave him some toes with toenails, but like only 2 of them, which I think helps to bring the spidery aspect back into play. Otherwise, once I gave his feet some ever-important over-large ankles, I tossed him into the oven to save my progress before getting to work adding lots of veins, which I made by applying some bacon bond over the surface with a toothpick. By pulling it into a somewhat veiny-looking shape and baking it again, I'm left with these slightly translucent veins all over his body, which I think look pretty good. Oh yeah, before I baked the veins, I also smooshed a little reddish-pink lump into his mouth to make his tongue. With that though, the Manspider, Peter Parker, is finally finished, which means all that's left to do is add a little extra color. I'll start by sponging the body with an even paler pale flesh tone, which ended up making him look a little too pale, so I sprayed his entire body with a slightly darker reddish wash to help bring him back to life. I'll make sure to drop my paintbrush on his finger and stain the skin red, before doing the same thing to the rims of his eyes to add a little contrast between the black and the flesh tones. I'll then completely coat the eyes in black, but leave the rims slightly red for added viewer discomfort, then tickle the tips of the teeth with a thin white to imply that he's got immaculate dental hygiene before painting all the nails with a sepia wash that I'll then scrub the majority away to reveal the gnarly nail beneath. Now, I kinda like the naked, hairless version of Peter we have here, but I can appreciate that a little variation in color and texture would go a long way, so I'm gonna give him a little brown body hair by applying this ultra-fine 1mm long static grass. I don't want it to be uniformly applied, so I'll gently stipple some basing glue onto Peter's legs and forearms, then apply the grass using my applicator. I'll do the same thing to his backside, and then remove the excess with a vacuum. You can collect the leftover by attaching a stocking to the end of the vacuum, but I truly hate this ultrafine static grass, so this way I can get rid of it without feeling too guilty about throwing it away. Finally, once the hair is dried, I can safely coat Peter's eyes in a layer of UV resin to really make him shine and bring this beautiful octo-armed boy to life. However, before we call it good here, I decided he needed a couple more extra long hairs, which I will slowly and strategically apply with a pair of tweezers and my slowly dwindling will to live. With that finished, however, we're finally done here and on to the glamour shots. As always, a massive thank you to my wonderful patrons who continue to support this channel despite things like this video, and a special hey how are you to my newest patrons. Sean Allard, Lucy Loves Noodle Soup, Kira the Pickle, Kibo, Kiwi, Hannah Bauer, Power Player, Son of Mephisto, Koivu, Debatable Maple, Anna Vederburn, D Machado, Eric North, Hallie Khan, Autism Man, Furious Beardsley, Robin Marsh, Lynn, Echo Isles, Blair Anderson, Jack and Freddy, Rusty Shacky, Cries Not So Art, Lavana613, Pete Riddle, Edwin M, Justin Herman, Amy and Willie in Tucson, Tedster, and Linda, I love you, thanks for taking care of me when I got sick. You are the not quite right limbs that hold up this not quite right cephalothorax of a channel. If you like this video, then make sure you write to Sony Entertainment and let them know that you want to see this version of Peter Parker in the next Manspider movie. Otherwise, we'll see you next time. Cheers.